All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. For today's show, I was joined by Brendan Murphy. This is Brendan's fourth appearance on the Fifth Dimension. That's right, number four. So you know he's bringing the heat. As always, Brendan is an author, researcher. He's got his Substack. He's the host of the Truthiverse podcast. Brendan has been putting in the work for, I want to say, close to 20 years now, researching, exploring the nature of consciousness and who we are. And we had another fantastic conversation. I mean, this guy knows I feel like I could ask him anything and he just knows the answer. All right. So, I mean, this is a fun and engaging conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. It's always a pleasure to be able to catch up with Brendan, and it certainly won't be the last time you see him on the show. He's got a new book coming out soon. So once that's dropping, we're definitely going to have another episode. But fasten your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen, because a lot of good information in here that I think will shape the way you go into the world and really reclaiming our own health, our own sovereignty, and ultimately uncovering the true nature of who we are. So special thank you to Brendan again for coming on. And if you're a fan of the show, subscribe, whatever platform you're on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, wherever it may be, X even. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think of the show. Your feedback, pressing the like button, pressing the subscribe button does help the algorithms, even though I don't know exactly how they work. But I know it helps the algorithms and more people find the show, which is what we need if we want to be living in fifth dimensional consciousness, baby. So press that subscribe button. You can also send me a text directly if you're listening on the audio platforms. Press the send a text button, and you can send direct feedback. Let me know who you want on the show. Let me know what areas are interesting to you. Let me know if you totally hate the show. Whatever it may be, I appreciate your feedback. And press that send a text if you're listening on audio. And even if you want to pitch yourself for a podcast, I'm always open to that. Let the guests. I've had many people come to me over the last couple months about coming on the show, and we've had great conversations. So if you feel you're a fit, let me know. Press the send a text button. You can also subscribe on Substack, mcdermott.substack.com, mcdermod.substack.com. Every podcast, poem, book, whatever it may be that I'm putting out there, you'll see for Substack on the free. Great way to be notified whenever the show has a new episode release. So be sure to subscribe over there. And I look forward to seeing you on the Substack. You can also book a one-on-one tarot reading with me, whether it's an individual session, and we just launched a new 12-week course. That is right, a new 12-week course looking at tarot and the hero's journey. It is an introspective journey where we do 12 tarot sessions together, one a week, and we are continually going inward and ultimately unpacking your own hero's journey. It's deep work. If you feel called to explore it, the link to book is in the episode show notes below. If you use the code 5D, 20% off on checkout. Get a really good deal, especially considering price of one tarot reading versus getting 12 and really doing some deep inner work. Can't beat it. So I look forward to seeing you step into that journey right there, the hero's journey. That's what it's all about. And then special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. It's your one-stop shop for all your holistic, metaphysical, spiritual, wellness needs, all right there. If you stop in, let Patty know from Evan from the Fifth Dimension sent you into the store. That'll put a smile on her face. And thank you to her for allowing the show to grow in new ways and, really setting the stage for what's to come. We got a lot of beauty, a lot of great guests coming in the near future. So I encourage you guys to subscribe. We are taking the show to new heights right now, and I can feel that positive momentum just continuing to grow and build. Big things coming for 2025. And this conversation with Brendan Murphy is reflective of that. So let's jump into it. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, we have Brendan Murphy returning and joining the Fifth Dimension once again. Brendan, always a pleasure to connect, brother. Thanks for coming back on.
Great to be here again, man. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, for sure. And I was gonna say, it's at the point where you're in terms of total appearances, maybe not quite number one. I think you're either two or three at this point in the top three total appearances by guests. So you're making your
That's
presence felt on the platform, and it's
that's,
definitely
that's
appreciated.
rare air, brother. It's an honor.
And I love it, man. You've kind of seen the full journey because I've been going at it about 5 years now, and I think first time I had you on was in 2020, which is gonna be about 5 years ago. So,
That's
been
wow.
seeing the whole journey. But so tell me, man, we're going into 2025. I've been in enjoying, particularly on Facebook, seeing all the things that you're talking about, right? And obviously, we just had an election season in the U.S. We're just kind of sweeping changes. If you look at, I guess, the numerology of 2025, it's all about the end of cycles and transformation, right? So I think we're moving into sort of a period of transformation. But um, what, where do you think we're at, kind of collectively, right? I saw a post of yours, and you mentioned a lot of people seem to really enjoy like the alphabet agencies more so than they realize, right? And I personally think there's a lot of people, even in the quote unquote freedom movement, still into the fear and the dissonance, right? So where do you see that we're kind of at as a collective, kind of headed into this new year, an opportunity for new energy? Are we bringing the same old with us? Like, where are we at, man?
Far out. I don't know. Does anybody know where we're at? Like,
That's why I'm
can
asking.
anybody help us? We need to bring on like a panel of people and figure this out because
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think that there's so much going on at once. Like,
Mm,
we've got if you look at the truth movement, that's a weird entity in itself. If you look at the population of the normies, they're just kind of more or less going about their business, but I think the last 5 years has shaken a lot of people up and shaken a lot awake as well. So I mean that's a good thing. And that I think that's been the closest thing we've ever seen to exponential as as we have in our lifetimes. So that's a positive to come out of the biggest psyop that we've ever seen. And I know you know what I'm talking about. So
hmm
I think a lot of it is moving in the right direction. Maybe we've even hit like a point of critical mass, and we can't quite see it fully yet. It may only take 10% of the population or less, maybe the square root of 1%.
mm,
So I don't know. I mean, I think the thing that will kind of be like the like the straw, the last straw, and definitely in the American psyche is going to be this Trump presidency, because
hmm
for different reasons, a lot of people are still in the matrix of the political system, and they have their savior figures, and the guy on the left, the guy on the right, whatever. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say that I have a crystal ball. I think the least I can say is, well, it's going to be very interesting because we've never seen anything quite as strange and compelling as what's just started to unfold. I mean, aside
hmm
from the fact that, the Democrats are going to do everything they can to stop this guy from actually starting his presidency, that aside, the fact that once he's in there and doing his thing, I mean, he's assembled around him a very interesting collection of people,
hmm
including Ron Paul of all people. Like,
Right.
I mean, this guy should have been president decades ago. Like Ron Paul, if
Right.
you're going to have a president, it should have been him decades ago. So, man, I mean, that's a really interesting move. I'm watching Trump essentially assemble like the Avengers around him, and and that's interesting because it's either when you see Ron Paul in the mix, it's like, well, I mean, we all know Ron Paul is about as real as it gets. He's as authentic as it gets. So this is either like a next level, like masterful move of psyopery. Like this is like the greatest political psyop against the people ever. Because of course, who are you going to invite into the fray if you want to look legitimate? Well, Ron Paul and
hmm
all the other people they're pulling in. So it's either the greatest political psyop, or it's maybe the most interesting and promising thing that the American people have ever had to look at in the last 60 years.
Right. For sure, man. Well, there's reasons for optimism in that regard, right? You bring in like a Ron Paul. All right, maybe we can seriously start talking about the Federal Reserve, cutting ties with the Federal Reserve, right? Maybe backing. Now, I am a bit I don't think they're necessarily going to take the US dollar and back it with the gold standard again, right? It's very possible maybe we cut ties with the Federal Reserve and then, I don't know, we create some sort of central digital bank currency, right? It's very possible, and that's not to be a doomer or a black pillist, but
Yeah.
and the same thing with like RFK Jr., right? You come in, if he radically changes the food system, you take all the dyes out of the food, you start, you just talked about eliminating the ability for drug manufacturers to advertise on television, right? So there's all these things that I think that are likely coming in some facet that's actually going to benefit the population, right? Let's say you take
Yeah.
fluoride out of the water. Okay, who's to say that doesn't trigger some sort of mass awakening event? Because boom, we don't have our pineal glands calcified, and all of a sudden we're able to tap into a little bit more of deeper spiritual consciousness on
Mm,
the American collective like psyche, right? So there's definitely reasons for optimism. I mean, I myself, I didn't vote for the reason of I don't necessarily believe in acquiescing to and consenting to people just ruling over me, I suppose. I guess that's kind of an anarchist principle. Um, and I figure it's all kind of a puppet show anyways, in a certain sense. They're going to get who they want to in there. But there's also it is weird because there's all of these things that we can be positive about, but then you also have to look at the other side. I have a very I don't know, maybe it's just my own trust issues. I look at Elon Musk and I see, well, Neuralink and the smart grid and sort of the electric vehicles and all the kind of things that he fronts being involved. And I'm like, well, if this guy's such a leader in the transhumanist movement, are we also kind of setting the stage for an entrance into this sort of new era, right? I mean, right after he got elected, he posted on Twitter, Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. So it's like, well, is that the new world order in our faces, right? Or is
mm,
this actually representing a new change, a return to American traditionalism, right? And so
mm,
it's a weird space to be in. And I think one of the major issues that we're seeing, Brendan, is like the people who are all in on the Trump team and kind of what you were saying and being optimistic, they're starting a war with the people who, maybe are rigid in what I was just saying about like Musk and transhumanism and kind of looking at the darker side. And we're kind of having this like internal strife now about what's the direction going to be instead of actually sitting there, relaxing, taking a breath, engaging in mutual beneficial conversations, right? So again, we're kind of going right back to butting heads, and that in itself, I think is a bit troublesome. But in the same breath, I don't know, man. It is tough to predict the future, but I do think there's a reason for tremendous optimism. I'm kind of on the
mm.
white pills right now. Like I have a deep sense of faith in the direction that we're going compared to where we were in 2020 when it's like, oh man, we're we're in trouble, you know?
Right, yeah, right. I mean, that did not look good at all when we were watching I mean, the full-on zombification of the people around us going, "Oh, we've got to have our masks on and we've got to go and wash our hands before we walk into a shop." Like, I mean, just that was bizarre. And I hope that most of those people look back at that time now and want to give themselves a bit of an uppercut and will do better. But I think most of those people, hopefully not wishful thinking, would be a lot harder to repeat that psyop on at this point. Like, I mean, I can't see how they'd make it a similar thing stick at this point. Like they can, as much as they can broadcast it in the legacy media, it doesn't mean that necessarily people are going to be believing it. So I think in a way it's kind of like a psychological immunization against future kind of similar psyops. So yeah, there's definitely some reasons to be optimistic, and I think even if you don't like some of the political stuff and the players that are involved in the game at the moment, which is it's a very surreal thing what we're seeing. I mean, if you're not invested in it and identified with it, looking at it from a more neutral perspective, it's bizarre. I mean, it's a total circus. It's the weirdest manifestation of politics I think we've ever seen. So much drama and so much hype, like you would not believe. And at the same time, we have to be realistic in expectations as well. Like I see people complaining about, for example, as an example, RFK Jr. because he advocates for safer vaccines and because of this, that, and the other. And I personally, I've seen him shilling for Israel, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
awful. Um, but if you look at it in terms of where we're at and where we're trying to go, like the people are kind of like the average mass consciousness is kind of like here on the floor, and RFK represents maybe like a 10-20% shift in
Mm-hmm.
in the right direction. It's not perfect. He's not perfect. He's got some major like blind spots, or maybe he's compromised in certain ways. So it's like you couldn't put someone like you or me in that position because that's just too far beyond where most people are ready to go. Like most people
Mm-hmm.
are ready to shift 10-20%. and not any more than that because it's just going to be too much for them to, too much information, too much perspective shift. So, it's going to happen in incremental stages, if anything, before we get to like a big dramatic, like, having Ron Paul as president or something. We have to kind of work our way to this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think there's you got to be realistic about it, and just see that things can move in the right direction in a very imperfect and awkward kind of a way. It's a process, It's not going to be this huge quantum leap into like, oh, 5D paradise, and we're all like these magical quantum beings, and everybody is an anti-vaxxer now, and like, it doesn't work like that.
Right. It sounds nice. I'd love to have that kind of overnight, flip of the script, but I think that would require too much. If anything, that would require an immense dark night of the soul in a very, very short period of time. And that in itself, I mean, I don't know if we're capable of handling that based on where we are,
Mm.
collectively and individually. But what's even interesting is you mentioned Israel. I think the tide is even turning on that so much as well. You look at the IDF pressing criminal charges against Netanyahu, and if he used to go to, I think I just read, if he was to go to Auschwitz for a memorial, the government of Poland will arrest him and send
Wow,
him
yeah,
to criminal court, right? So it's like, and it's interesting because it's generally in America the left that is very pro-Palestine and actually kind of almost sees the military industrial complex for what it is. I mean, they've been
yeah.
calling that out for a long time. I think one of the only saving graces of somebody like Bernie Sanders, for example, is he talking, he's been calling out these issues for a long time. And I think that's why a lot of the younger people gravitated towards him in mass, is for actually speaking truth to sort of the role of America's military and Israel and what's going on over there. So it's like we have all of these different shifts in consciousness that are taking place, and I don't think it's like fully come together in sort of one entity, like you were saying, and one sort of leap. But the seeds have definitely been planted, and I think they're actually starting to come to fruition in a lot of ways. And to me, it feels like because of that, over time, we're only going to see this actualize. Now, again, I don't know how that plays out with transhumanism, the technological revolution, and maybe the system that's going to come into place down the line. Um, but I don't see how a lot of these changes that we're making. I don't see the negative, or at least perceivably. And you could argue, oh, maybe we got to give a little. The system, the people in the system are saying we got to give a little bit of they're waking up to this. We got to acquiesce in this way. We got to acquiesce in that way. But who's to say we're not going to keep doing that, even when it comes to things like transhumanism, and when we're kind of making demands, and we're actually starting to see them met in a lot of ways. And I think there's an empowerment that is really being felt by a lot of people to stand firm in who they are and what they believe in, much more so than in 2020. Because, I mean, back in 2020, it was really you, me, and, maybe that one other person in town who's, who is willing to actually go outside without a mask or actually speak up. And it was very difficult to find people who were, I would say, very outspoken during that
Mm.
time. Comparatively to now, it's like I don't get really any pushback for speaking what I think. And, even though some of it may be more on the controversial or conspiratorial side, a lot of people seem to be open to this new way of thinking and to actually challenging the aspects of what legacy media is putting out and what they've been sort of conditioned to think. Like it's like we're in a great period of questioning and it's sort of
Mm.
redefining our
Yeah.
relationship to the system, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of skepticism now coming from, I mean, more and more people in general. Like, one of the classic examples I've seen in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or so is on Facebook, where you get, these legacy media Facebook pages, pushing the narrative, always pushing the establishment narrative. But in the last 5 years, I've seen like the level of pushback in their comment threads has been off the charts. And it's great to see like the people who are awake commenting on those threads outnumber the people who are, in the system, or the trolls and what have you, the bots or whatever. And they're just getting slammed. So it's awesome. Like the narrative we have shifted the narrative, and we're like we've never been so vocal about going, oh no, look, this is wrong. What you're saying is incorrect. You are lying, and
Hmm.
we're going to sit here and dismantle everything you've said and call you out on it until you stop it or go away or something like, or start being honest, which we know they won't do.
Right.
I mean, a lot of them, a lot of these legacy media outlets are just being propped up by, I think, government funding. Like in Australia, we have, for example, we have the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC, which has been government funded for many, many years, I think from the beginning. And also Channel 10 has gone into, as of years ago, they went into receivership because they weren't making any money. They were just doing so poorly. And I was kind of satisfied with that in a way because they were such stalwarts of the establishment and such shills for the establishment, constantly pushing the all the narratives, and to see them having to go into, such dire straits and needing government support to continue to exist is a great sign of the times. Like people aren't listening anymore, not to
Hmm.
anywhere near the extent. It's like the only people still tuning into these outlets, I think, are the baby boomers and anyone who's older than that. It's like it's a good
Hmm.
thing.
Right. And I was going to say that generation, they're not going to be here that much longer. Not that I'm wishing upon death upon them by any means, but
Yeah.
their influence is definitely not what it was even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think that shift in terms of who is actually kind of running the system and who's in charge of most corporations nowadays, like it's not the baby boomers, it's not the people who are being influenced by the legacy media talking points. And it's interesting because I've noticed the same thing on I'm probably on X much more than I am Facebook, and so I kind of see the same thing going on where regardless of what ABC News posts or NBC, whatever it is, they get ratioed on every single post. Everyone. It doesn't matter what they're putting out there, they're getting a ratio. But
Yeah.
it was really funny the other day. Somebody ratioed Elon Musk. It was like this account with like 500 followers. Basically, I don't want to say a nobody. Obviously, they're their own person, but in terms of the influence they have, they're not swaying public opinion on the daily, right? And they ratioed Elon Musk about the immigration debate that's been going on with the visas and everything. And he made a brilliant point. I don't remember exactly what it was. Uh, but then Elon Musk deactivated the guy's account after he
Oh,
ratioed him, right? So
whoa. Okay.
it's like there's still a level of censorship that is taking place, and especially on X, where if you kind of go against some of what Elon believes in, or if you kind of personally attack him, there's a lot of stuff being taken down, especially when it comes to like Israel. I mean, there's a whole bunch of um, accounts that are being taken down when they're talking about the genocide over there. So it's interesting to see even now as you kind of push at these sort of alternative mainstream voices, there is still kind of a censorship issue in some aspects to where okay, if I'm calling out Elon Musk about his support for immigration or the visas or whatever, boom, I get my account banned right on the spot, right? And then, it's the fact that he could get ratioed by somebody with 500 followers tells me that that person was speaking a deep level of truth, and they don't want that opinion out there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say, so there's still that like censorship push and maybe type of influencing the narrative, but to me, the fact that it even happened tells me, all right, they may have already lost the reins on the ability to really control a narrative, even if it's coming from, let's say, an Elon Musk or an RFK Jr. or Donald Trump, right? People
Mm.
aren't afraid to actually kind of call these people out instead of just blindly um, worshiping them and painting them as some sort of savior,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It definitely looks like the age of hero worship and celebrity worship is over. It's done. It's
Hmm.
dead. And partly I think we can thank platforms which I personally loathe, like Instagram and TikTok,
Mm,
for doing that, because now every man and his dog has a following. They're doing videos and all sorts of stuff. So there's no sense of separation anymore. Like, oh, they're doing something I can't possibly do, and like it's gone. All the
mhm,
mystique, the aura of magic around it, and the intimidation factor is not there anymore. So we're just, like you said, like someone going after Elon Musk, regardless of how many followers they have, it's one of the positive aspects of these platforms and the opportunity that they bring to us. Unfortunate that he's engaging in censorship like that, since the whole kind of platform that he was operating on, so to speak, was that it's going to be a free speech platform and all
mhm,
this kind of thing. But I don't see that. I don't see it that way in the long run. I think, given his leanings in the transhumanist direction, it won't last long as a kind of a free kind of a platform. He'll push it so that people will have to, provide identification and then provide evidence that they're, chipped or whatever. It'll escalate gradually. I think that's been coming for a while, but yeah, we just have to create the solutions on the fly and see how we go. Like now we've got, for example, Substack, which is
mhm.
which is great. Like I haven't seen any censorship there. I've seen all sorts of opinions. The fact that I'm still publishing freely there is proof that they're clearly not doing a whole lot of at least close scrutiny, let alone censorship. So we keep having these solutions crop up out of the general population. Like there's so much innovation happening now. Anybody with an internet connection could have a bright idea, and then the next thing you know, everybody's jumped onto it and they're using it, and it's like, wow, okay, so we've just like reclaimed or claimed ownership of the narrative and the myth making power from the would be, powers
Mhm.
that would be, because now we can just speak freely. What a nice change that is. And so, yeah, it's an interesting time, man. I mean, there's so much noise, but at the same time, there's also a lot of opportunity as well to have your say and to connect with people in a meaningful way now. Like, beyond the 30-second reels and the TikToks and stuff. Like we can actually have conversations thanks to a platform like Substack, for example, which I think you're on, right?
Yep, I am on Substack, and it's been beautiful to witness sort of the evolution of Substack and how it's grown and changed. And what's interesting is I didn't even realize to the depth and extent of Substack itself until recently, because I've been on there almost 4 years now, and I would sort of just go and like publish an article or like put up a podcast or whatever it may be, like link a podcast there. But there's whole forums and discussions and comment, and I'm like, I didn't even realize it's built like a social media platform until a couple of months ago. And I'm like, I haven't even been using this to my own full capability, right? And,
Hmm.
and so I've kind of had to start to try and learn it on a deeper level. But when I first started publishing on there, it didn't really have that same depth and layers and what it is now. And you're right, it is beautiful to witness. And I noticed one thing I did notice that it actually gave me an assurance of like a good feeling about Substack was at some point on X, you know how if you link an article on something, it'll pop up with the image and like kind of give you a rundown on the article where it's not just like a cold link. At some point, Twitter shifted the way when you post a Substack link, it won't give you a preview image. It won't give you what it is. It won't tell you what it is. You just have to click the link and figure out. And it used to do that actually. And so Twitter is kind of almost like, I don't know if they view it as competition or whatnot. It was ever since Elon took over, they actually kind of disassociated themselves with Substack by not allowing you to preview the articles and allowing like to even engage with Substack in a more meaningful way. So it was interesting to see that shift, and actually kind of made me think, okay, well the controllers over at Twitter or X, they don't like Substack. Then they wouldn't do that if for basically any other platform that I've noticed. So all right,
Interesting.
that tells me that there's a deeper level of truth happening in a Substack, and they don't want you to be able to preview the the article on there. So
Yeah.
it's been kind of nice to see Substack's evolution, because it feels like now, even if people aren't publishing themselves on Substack, they have an account and they're subscribed to different people and they're getting their information from it. It's like kind of almost been one of the main platforms now, just to it's like picking up your daily newspaper for a lot of people. Let me see on Substack what's going on and that's where people are getting their info. And I think that in itself is a beautiful um, testament to the mindset a lot of people are taking on and actually going to independent people instead of
Mm.
these larger corporations to shape their opinions and perception about what's taking place. So it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
It is, and it's also proof that the success of Substack proves that people are still willing to actually have a thought that sustains for more than 2 seconds, and
Hmm.
to follow that thought, and to actually be willing to engage in something a little bit deeper level, and maybe see a different point of view. Like, because if you were not aware of Substack and you were just using the main sort of, like the big three or four platforms, like X and TikTok and Facebook and whatever, you could be forgiven for having the impression that people were just stuck in this soundbite sort of superficial culture where, you don't engage with someone unless it's to just like be like, yeah, good one, or to go, oh, you suck, you're an idiot.
Hmm.
Like, and that's the extent of it. And then suddenly we're on Substack and it's like, oh, people are having conversations, they're thinking, they're philosophizing, they're
Hmm.
developing ideas. This is amazing. And to see the contrast between that and, a platform like, even like Threads, how Instagram created Threads, right? And it's like, if I post the same thing to Substack as a note versus that same thing on Threads, the difference is like night and day. If it's something that's kind of like counterculture or anti-establishment or like, controversial,
Hmm.
it's like the morons come out of the woodwork on Threads
Yeah.
with exactly what you would expect of the Instagram community when they're confronted with something that doesn't support their existing belief system.
Hmm.
Like I was horrified but not surprised by what the kind of stuff that was directed at me, right? Whereas on Substack, you can post the same thing and you actually get people stopping and thinking or just expressing some basic support or whatever, and not being trolled by a billion idiots who think that they have all the answers because they've got a keyboard they can hit. Like
Yeah.
it's just such an interesting culture shift away from what we've had on offer. So it's amazing. Like we can shift there. I mean, I saw Amy, my partner Amy. She went from we were experimenting with another platform called, oh man, what's it called? Beehive.
Okay.
And we were publishing there. It was kind of, it's like a newsletter sort of platform, and we were kind of using it like a blog. And we realized after a little while that it wasn't really viable. It was kind of like we were publishing into a black hole, and
Yep.
didn't have the connectivity and the interaction and all that sort of stuff, the social aspect. And so Amy went over from there to starting up a Substack from scratch, and she brought up maybe 20 followers or subscribers over from the other publication, and she published a note that basically went viral and is, I think, still getting engagement now, like 2 months later or whatever, and with just 20 odd followers, and suddenly this post actually gets seen and it gets circulated and people are engaging with it, and she's now several hundred followers just from that one post kind of thing, and it's like this is an ecosystem that is geared towards, it's not perfect by any means, but at
Of
least
course.
it's geared towards people just being, having a meaningful expression and not just trying to get attention for the sake of getting attention like most of the other sort of platforms are designed for.
I definitely agree with you. And if anything, when I was talking about learning about Substack, the notes, writing notes and things like that, that's something I had no idea was really even going on. So it's been sort of a journey for me to actually start engaging in that way and see how others are doing it. And it's like there is meaningful community and connections and actual, like you were saying, deeper thought and ideas that are taking place here, which is beautiful because I think we need platforms like that without the threat of censorship, right? I can go on to a Elon Musk post on X and write a reply, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, if I'm calling this guy out, there's a very real chance my account is about to get shut down, which would be very unfortunate because, there's a few people that, that's a good platform for me. And, I've made some connections on there and I use it. It's get the most out of it, right? So just having the no censorship, nothing like there's no like there's not even in the back of my mind. Like I can put anything on Substack and will I get pushback once in a while? Yeah, maybe sure. I have one follower on Substack who I appreciate him because there'll be something maybe I say in a post or podcast about or whatever where a lot of it he agrees with and engages with on a deeper level, but then he'll call me out on something. And I remember there was one point where I was talking about self-improvement and self-development, and I wish I could remember the exact word he used because it was great. It was a great question that he asked. He said, "At what point does your self-improvement become like basically self-obsession, and then you lose the and I hadn't necessarily thought of it in that way, and I'm like, that's a good point. Is that what I'm engaging in? I don't think so." But, and it's like you can get critical responses on there without it being some sort of personal attack on who you are.
Mm.
And like it's more meaningful dialogue. And it kind of shaped my perception on how to even approach topics like self-improvement and action, and to make it not so it's framed in a manner of egotistical and I think it comes down to more than just intention, because obviously the intention wasn't about egotistical, but maybe the way I was writing it, it comes off in that manner. And then, it impacts the message and it impacts what you're trying to do. Right. So it's like, all right, I appreciate the people on here who are willing to call me out and not just, you know, blindly follow me in a sense and go with whatever it is that I have to say. Right.
Mm.
There's meaningful dialogue and meaningful constructive criticism that I've gotten on there that when Instagram, like you were saying, is the absolute worst, man. I remember especially back in 2020, 2021, when I started posting about things, like it just went to personal, like you are a terrible person.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? It's like you are horrible, you are the scum of the earth. From people, I'm
yeah,
like, oh my God, like this is so, and I think it is still like that on Instagram, where if I go into a comment section and I write something, it's like, "You're an idiot. What are you talking?" People
yeah.
are up in arms. They're ready to get their pitchforks and their torches and like come to my house. And I'm like, come on, is this really where we're at still?
Mm.
And so I think Instagram's a lost cause in that way. I'll still post on there, but it,
Yeah,
in that regard, it's definitely a lost cause. But there's
yeah.
definitely a beautiful shift with the age of Substack, and it's interesting because I think people are looking for that alternative, and maybe not all of them have found it. But as it continues to pick up and it continues to grow, that could become almost a community square for people to kind of freely exchange thought and ideas. And you never
Mm.
know, it could go the way of where Elon Musk bought Twitter. It's supposed to be a free speech platform. He's censoring. I don't know about who owns Substack and what its intentions are and motivations are. Who knows? Maybe it goes in that direction. I certainly hope not. But for now, I think at the very least, it is a manifestation of the desire for critical thinking and freedom of thought and freedom of conversation and ultimately freedom of association, because we can discuss ideas with about anything with anyone on there without worrying if I respond to the wrong or follow the wrong person on Twitter that uh I don't know, my friend is gonna be like, "Who? Wait. I've had people say, why are you following this person? Why are you engaging with this person? No, 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 no." It's like I don't have to agree with them fully. Like
Yeah.
this is the free exchange of ideas. This is what we're supposed to do. Engage with people we disagree with because
Mm.
it's important, right? And I don't think
Yeah.
Substack, to me, at least based on some of the conversations I've had, it isn't fully an echo chamber. There's freedom oriented people, but there's a really diverse range of thoughts and opinions on there, which has helped me learn and helped me grow for sure.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and there's also the full spectrum is there, including the sleeping normies they've discovered Substack at some point along the way. So you can still find those types of like the Instagram type people creating their own little communities in Substack, but it's kind of funny because from what I've seen of them, they feel they don't quite understand what it's all about and the purpose of it, and they feel like it's an affront that people could just freely express themselves on Substack without the censorship and without being cancelled. Like they're really up in arms about that. There is
Mm.
this sort of subset of these kind of like it's like the far left people who are like the most fascist people during the Clownvid 19 episode. These are the people who are still up in arms about freedom of speech and how outrageous it all is. And it's just funny, they don't quite grasp that's kind of the idea with Substack is, there is no censorship. That's the thing. There's no thought control. You don't have to follow the narrative blindly and just regurgitate the programming you've been subjected to your entire life. And that's why it's a breath of fresh air, and I think that's why it's caught on so much as well, man. Because more and more people are sick of being told what to think and being cancelled for having the wrong kind of thought or expressing themselves incorrectly. So we're looking for solutions. And I mean, Amy and I set up an alternative social platform back halfway through 2018. But every time Amy and I do something, we're usually 5 to 10 years too early.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
getting traction has been a bit of a bastard with that, but we ended up shutting it down a little while ago, a while back. I don't remember when exactly, but I think it's good to have something like, it's sort of like Substack is kind of a little bit along the lines of what we were envisioning as a solution to the encroaching, cancel culture and censorship. So, things are going in the right direction at the same time as there's always the agenda rolling forward, but it seems like it's being tripped up and getting caught up in along the way much more than it ever has now. There's more obstacles, and the obstacles that we're throwing at it, it's struggling to keep up with, I think.
Absolutely. Well, where would you think, like, in terms of the psyops and the ways in which the agenda or the mainstream, whatever it may be, which psyops and which ways that they're attempting to influence perception or shape the way we think or program us in a certain way, where do you think it is that we might be still most vulnerable, or where people like I mean, because I do think there's a lot of progress and there's a lot of growth, but there's always going to be areas in which there is an unknown, right? And maybe if you look at the whole drone story going on, right? I think that's a you start looking at something like Project Bluebeam, there's not a lot of people who know what Project Bluebeam is yet. There's starting to be more discussion on it, but it's kind of like you just talked about starting things early. I was talking about Project Bluebeam in 2020, and it didn't, for a lot of people, it didn't necessarily, maybe it wasn't a huge discussion back then because it wasn't as relevant. But, all right, we're starting to see the manifestations of that type of agenda. So, I mean, where in the psyop world do you think we're kind of still uh, more vulnerable in actually being programmed and being manipulated to follow certain narratives that could potentially lead us down a path, maybe not a no return, but further into the actual agenda?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas where, you mentioned psyops. I think there's a couple that stand out to me where we still have vulnerabilities. Like, in particular, there's still only, I think, a relatively small portion of the population that really understands that germ theory is basically wrong,
Hmm.
and that there is no actual proof that a pathogenic virus actually exists in the first place. Um, like I've been watching this. That's one of the things I've watched with interest on the social platforms in the last 4 or 5 years to see if people are starting to catch on to that. And there's definitely been a percentage of people who've had that light bulb moment and gone, yeah, no, that's actually complete rubbish. But at the same time, it's like in compensation for that, there's the rest of the truth movement that refuse to entertain it. They will not go there.
Hmm.
They're still hanging on to stories like the lab leak thing, and the problem is that if you don't reject the roots of germ theory and the roots in particular of virology, because virology is the thing that most of their health related psyops rests on. Like, it's HIV, bird flu, swine flu. I mean, all it just goes on and on. And it's always a viral outbreak, so to speak, Ebola. And it's always based on absolute garbage. And that's what people don't realize is that
Hmm.
there's this layer of, it's like an epistemological layer that they haven't examined yet. And it's the question of how do virologists reach their conclusions? How do they know that a virus, firstly, exists, and secondly, that it does what they are telling us it supposedly does? And they haven't gone to that level. That's the roots of it. And when you go there and you understand their methods are fraudulent, and that every conclusion they reach based on those fraudulent methods is also fraudulent, then
Hmm.
you can let it go and you can just jettison it. And every single time you hear something about a viral outbreak somewhere, it is incorrect. That is not what's happening, and that's not what's making people sick. And invariably, it's some kind of an industrial, toxification of the local environment. People are getting sick because there's heavy metals or there's fumes of this or that or whatever. But they cover that up by saying, oh, there's a viral outbreak, go and get your shots and we'll all be fine. But that's not how it works. That's not how nature works. And we need to move past that so that we can stop being vulnerable to the ongoing health psyops. That's one of them anyway.
Definitely. And it was, we were talking, that's how I saw you on Alex X podcast a few months back. He was the one who kind of awoke me to that side of the health, because I was very interested in health freedom. And once I started to look into the nature of germ theory, it really did connect a lot of those dots to see how they actually manipulate the public and with these health scares and with pandemics and actually in creating a fear narrative. You have to fear a virus, you have to fear this deadly pathogen, and once you realize that it in itself that is a fraud, the whole system for the medicine system, all of it comes crashing down. All of the jabs they give out, regardless of what it is, doesn't, and we're talking every single one of them, it's all built on a fraudulent idea. I mean, could you speak to like I don't know how well versed you are on like the roots of like germ theory, right? Maybe this is somebody who's tuning in, they've never heard this idea in their life, right? And this, because it is something that there, when you look at different subjects, and I think when it comes to the pandemics and it comes to health, there's areas that are almost off limits for discussion, right? And I think what you're speaking to, where we're not even having these debates because somebody who's in this system, they hear the idea and it's like they dismiss it at the idea stage. They're saying this idea is not viable, so therefore we're not even going to entertain it, we're not even going to discuss it, right? And there's different, in germ theory is not the only idea that's like that. There's you start going across the board on different areas and different um, subjects, there's a lot of things that are totally off limits where it's grounds for no discussion, and they say that it's not even worth having this discussion because it's rooted in absolute rubbish or it's fallacy, right? So they won't even entertain it, right? But I mean, could you kind of speak to those roots of why um, germ theory is implausible, right? And for anybody who might not be caught up on this, and like where to actually look and see the root causes of things like disease and illness. And because, we've been so ingrained to think you get sick, you have a virus, it's spread, wherever you, even if it's the common cold, right? Oh, you picked up the common cold from your neighbor because they had the cold, right? Now you're sick. So there's this such deeply ingrained, like, psychological program on what a virus is that I don't think most people are even willing to, they can't even entertain the idea that viruses don't cause illness, right?
Mm. And that's the thing. It's interesting because, like you said, they can't entertain the idea that viruses don't cause illness. There's a like a bind there that people get stuck on around the concept of a virus. And when you're saying, oh well, there's a certain path, there's certain like cognitive pathways people have been programmed to just go down over and over and over again. So they can't conceive of a different possibility. There's a lot, man, you just touched on a lot. There's a lot of things, a lot of tangents there. But yeah, I mean, the roots of it, the word virus means poison. It comes from the Latin that means poison. And that's where it started. And then gradually, we had the sort of Rockefeller medicine men started sort of taking over the medical field. And we started having these virologists come onto the scene. And there was this assumption that developed around, oh well, it's whatever's happening to your body. It's come in from the outside. It's come in from the outside world. You've been invaded by something. And obviously, the virologist type people took that mentality, and then they went looking for, well, okay, we filtered out like the bacteria. What's next? What else have we? What's left? What's smaller than bacterium? It's a virus. Like they basically conjecture this thing is there without having any actual direct evidence of the thing. They just presume there must be this other tiny thing that we can't see yet that's making you sick, because sickness comes from outside. It's not like there's no awareness of the mind body connection. There's no awareness of the fact that we literally will make ourselves sick through emotions being repressed, suppressed, stress, ongoing stress. I mean, there was none of that. It was always looking for a mechanistic cause, because we're living in the age of materialism, so we're looking for a material cause presumed to come from the outside. and it must be really tiny because we've filtered out all the bacteria and stuff, and we still can't see it. So, but we're sure there's something. And
Hmm.
then so you get this weird sort of pattern of this bias. They're just constantly hunting for confirmation bias. Um, and the methods that virologists have used from the beginning of the inception of their field of virology have always been illogical and fraudulent. Like they've never used proper controls in their experiments to rule out another possibility for what created the result that they're seeing in the lab. For example, like one of the linchpins of virology is the cytopathic effect.
Hmm.
And like the what they do is they have a cell culture, they feed it with the nutrients, whatever nutrients they're giving it. Then they will withdraw the nutrients and they will put in antibiotics. So antibiotic means anti-life, so it's something that poisons living things. So they starve the cell culture, they put a poison into the cell culture, and when the cell culture deteriorates, they go, "Oh well, it must be a virus." I mean, in simple terms, that's literally how they work. And it's like they've been hypnotized to not even be able to have the thought, what if the procedures we're doing are actually causing the deterioration of the thing, and it has nothing to do with an invisible presumed virus, which we've never proved exists. Like they're so hypnotized that they can't even have that thought, except for a very few of them, like Stefan Lanka, who is a virologist who has single-handedly disproved the entire paradigm by
Hmm.
showing the fraudulent methods and where they don't control the experiments properly and all this kind of thing. And you mentioned our mutual mate Alex Zek, who recently was involved in organizing a very major replication of Dr. Stefan Lanka's work. Because a couple of years ago, Stefan Lanka ran the cytopathic effect experiments basically on his own single-handedly, and he basically repeated them with a sample from a sick person, and then no, without introducing a sample from a sick person. So you just have the cell culture, you starve it, you introduce the antibiotics, and it dies. Except we haven't introduced fluids from a sick person. So how could there be any virus in there? So, and he got the same result. And this is what
Hmm.
the virologists don't control for. They don't do that other test to see if they're going to get the same result without the fluids from a sick person or whatever. So it's a major blind spot, institutional. And then recently, Alex Zek ran experiments, or he organized experiments to be run with someone who had that expertise. And they did like, I think it was like 90 trials or something of this cytopathic effect experiment. And they got the cytopathic effect over and over and over again without ever introducing the fluids from a sick person.
Hmm.
So it clearly, they've falsified the linchpin of the virologist's paradigm and their methodology. So it's a bogus science. It's really pseudoscience in its worst, most socially damaging form, because we use this pseudoscience to create public health policy and to determine who can leave the house and who can travel overseas. And it informs the entire vaccine paradigm. I mean, most of the vaccines are supposedly to fight viruses, which we now know don't exist. There's no evidence for them whatsoever. So, I mean, it's one layer of after another of this house of cards. And, like you said, like when someone's very deep in that conditioning, they can't entertain the possibility that a virus doesn't exist. Like, well, why am I sick then? What about this time, when I went to visit Aunt Mavis and then she was sick and then I got sick? How do you explain that, genius?
Right.
Like, because we don't have any other explanations for why you get sick, right? But that's the hypnosis, that's the programming talking. It's the mind control, and that mind control is actively, I mean, it's been actively pushed for decades by Big Pharma and its outlets and the legacy media, because it generates literally billions of dollars for them. And the last thing they want is a public who is informed about the fraud of virology, because all of a sudden, if people got that, if it clicked, I mean, billions of dollars walk out the door, and people
Yep.
are going, and they're going to go look for help from something that's actually maybe, for a start, not toxic and dangerous, and maybe actually does something positive in the body. So yeah, it's a huge psyop, and it's upholding a multi-billion-dollar industry. So they're not going to let it go quietly. And unfortunately, the programming's too for germ theory. I mean, vaccines have been the vaccine paradigm goes back 200 odd years. So we've had this thinking, this kind of external invasion. That's why I'm sick. Something got inside of me. That kind of thinking is over 200 years old now. So it's very difficult to break down that intergenerational paradigm of mind control and self hypnosis. And that's why it's so hard. It's to go from I'm sick because I got the coronavirus to there is no such thing as a virus. That's a huge leap for most people. Like, at some point, there has to be an opening in their psyche to be curious about, well, okay, like, what is going on here? Like, why
Hmm.
are people saying that there's no coronavirus? I mean, like, without the curiosity, we can't move it forward. Like, we're stuck. It's a stalemate because you've just got 100% programming versus the people who are actually just wanting to have a dialogue and go, hey, look at this, look at the methods that they use, look at the control studies that have been done now. It's like let's have a conversation about it, but the mind control doesn't support that.
Right. And something I really appreciate that what Alec does is he forces the virologist to take the burden of proof and put it on them, right? And it's like with these things, it's like, okay, you should be able to definitively prove with this theory, anytime you introduce any theory anywhere, there's a burden of proof that falls upon you to actually validate the claims, to actually prove what you're talking about. And for me, this was kind of the wake up call. It's like, there is no burden of proof with virology. There is no actual proof that it's there. And then, because this theory is so ingrained, they make the burden of proof fall upon the people who don't believe in virology. And it's like, well, okay, Alex says, let me run those studies. Let me actually the burden of proof should be on you guys, but let me take what you're claiming and put it to the test, and then it demonstrates clearly there is no viruses in the way that they are talking about. And even still, when you present those studies, people are so ingrained to what they believe that it's like they come up with straw man arguments as to why, oh, this doesn't make any sense, this is not a real study, this is, and it doesn't have any basis in what actually the study said. It's just emotional argument, it's emotional attachment, and it would shatter the whole paradigm. I know they're talking about the whole bird flu right now, and California declared a state of emergency over the bird flu, right? And, they're trying to say, oh, it could have a 30% mortality rate, something along those lines, right? So it's like maybe the start of 2025, we're going to have a little bit of a repeat of 2020 with the whole bird flu. But it's like if you understand that a virus doesn't exist, that means the bird flu doesn't exist. So what is it that is actually, if people are getting sick, and what is it? And I don't think people realize the power that their mind has in these things too. Like if you get sick and all of a sudden you start telling yourself, I have the bird flu, then you're going to start to manifest all of those very symptoms that they start talking about. It was the same thing with COVID, manifesting very specific symptoms. And, who knows? You might end up dying from it because you believe there's a 30% mortality rate and there's a 30% chance of dying. You might will yourself through the mind into an early grave in that way. And people don't realize just the impact of their own perception on how that influences their body, because the mind and body are directly linked. It's like when somebody goes to the doctor and they get told they have 2 weeks to live, there might be nothing wrong with them, but they take it, they internalize it, and they die. It's like I heard the story of the woman there was a woman who got breast cancer, or said she had breast cancer, was told that by the doctors, believed it, and then the doctor realizes later on, oh no, I made a mistake. She doesn't have breast cancer. Calls her, tells her she doesn't have breast cancer. They go back to check again, and it developed. Like she developed breast cancer after she had that diagnosis, a false diagnosis, right? And
Yep.
it's simply from the power of belief. I mean,
Mhm.
I myself am getting over a cold, a mild sickness, but I view it as like a body detoxification, right? It happened right
Mhm.
after here in town. I live in a very small town, so it's surprising that we actually have this, but there's this there's this thing called body stress release, and it's very similar to like massage or acupuncture, but it's not well known. There's less than 100 practitioners. Even I think in the United States, there's less than 100 practitioners for body stress release. There's less than 1,000 in the whole world. It's a very, very small scale practice, but it's tremendous. And what it's been, I go once a month, but she did the body stress release, and it really like cleared out some like deeply
Mhm.
rooted tension and stressors and things that I didn't necessarily realize I was holding on to, and some of it might have been emotional based and whatnot. But the very next day I develop a cold, and I think it's just that it's the body detoxifying and letting go of what was stuck and tense, and now it was released, and now it needs a way to actually get out, right? And so the body detoxifies in the symptoms of a cold, and it's like, oh, okay, because I have an understanding of what what I just did with my body in that way, I know that that's a detoxification process. It's a letting go of all of those things that were already built up inside of me, right? But without that understanding, who knows what I would attribute to? Oh no, they're talking about bird flu. Oh no, I still hear people saying, oh, so and so got COVID, so and so this, like so it would be very easy for me to just bypass what I just did at body stress release in the actual releasing of these whatever it was, emotions, trauma, it could have been a whole bunch of different things, and it's manifesting in physical symptoms, and just attribute it to some sort of external invasion or pathogen, when the reality is it's just my body having a natural healing response, and people don't realize that's all anything is. It's a natural healing response. The body is always trying to heal, and I think that disconnect, it's exactly what you're talking about. It allows this system to create the narrative of external pathogens in a fear-based way that we actually walk into the world.
Yeah, 100%. It's all perception programming. It's 100% mind control. The people who are putting this stuff out there know
Mm.
how to manipulate us psychologically, but they know also, and this is important for people to understand, like this has been known for many, many years. The mind affects the body, like you just gave a couple of great examples, very dramatically. Like belief very dramatically affects the biology. So they know this. This is not secret, amazing information that we're just finding out now. The people who orchestrate these psyops know that when we fall for their belief system that they're providing us, we fall for the fear, we will manifest physiological symptoms in line with that belief system. And that's why on the news, they go, oh, coronavirus, here's all the symptoms. Here's the symptoms. You're
Mhm.
going to have a sore throat. You're going to lose your sense of taste and smell, blah, blah, blah. On and on it goes. And so people are going, subconsciously, they now have this program. I will experience this stuff. Because they accept the belief that the thing is out there and some floating around, right? Somebody sneezed on me in the train and now, oh, now I've got COVID, coronavirus is in me. And so boom, they've got all of the symptoms they saw in the news because subconsciously they have connected all those dots, and that's the manifestation of the belief system. It's the physiological manifestation of a psychological structure. And that's what the disconnect between us and our bodies is so deep, and we're still just starting to heal that disconnect. It's so deeply rooted that people can't conceive that when they have a symptom they don't like in their body, the symptom is the healing process. And that is completely antithetical to what we've been programmed with. We've been programmed to look at a symptom as a defect resulting from contagion, something got inside me from the environment, or a random genetic, just breakdown for no reason, or hereditary, whatever. That's mostly, 99.9% nonsense as well. But that's the programming, and the nocebo effect. That's how people make themselves sick with their belief systems. Like you said, the woman gets the phone call, suddenly she manifests cancer. It's not. This is not esoteric knowledge. This is public knowledge, and the people running all the brainwashing think tanks and the outlets that program us, they know that we create our own sickness through our belief systems. It's public knowledge. So the people, have to start getting a bit up to speed on that and stop falling for it, because when we talk about a psychological operation, a psyop. I mean, COVID is the classic. To me, it's the all-time classic example. I was the only person I could find online in 2020 on social media saying you are literally being programmed to manifest your physical symptoms. You are physiologically creating your belief system in your body. I was the only person I could find who was saying this in 2020, and that's exactly what they know they are doing in a calculating way. So they're using the power. Like, we have this enormous creative power. That's just what we are. That's who we are. And they are hijacking that. It's kind of like, parasitism is not quite the right word, but they are hijacking that power because we give it away. We permission it by believing the story that they're selling us. And I mean, how many examples do we need? Evan, I ask you, how many times do we need to see that they are lying and that they keep lying before we finally learn the lesson and stop listening?
Exactly. Well, and I think the issue, it goes back to what we were speaking about, just the nature of there being uh, a virus or virology without that understanding on the fact that viruses don't exist and that there aren't external pathogens that are out there trying to hunt us down. And like it's like we're really the viruses are playing guerrilla warfare or something, you know. It's like to that level of extreme, but without understanding that it's a fallacy. You know, they can introduce the idea of the bird flu, for example, or they can introduce COVID, and it's like, oh, okay, well, they're lying about, let's say, mortality rate, or they're lying about the jabs, or they're maybe they lied, or they were overly cautious about masks, right? There's but they weren't lying about there being a virus. They weren't lying about there being a disease, right? So it's like we can't, it's almost like we can question, we're at a point where we can question the the whys and the hows and the whens and sort of all of the aspects of the narrative, but we can't question the root of the narrative itself. Because the
Mhm.
second you say there is no virus. There is no COVID. There is no bird flu. That's where the cognitive dissonance really comes in, and it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle people are on. I mean,
No.
Robert F. Kennedy's a great example where he won't entertain the idea of there being no COVID, right? And he
Yep.
is the health freedom guy. He's all, and I know Alec, for example, tried for the last several years, and this was before RFK was like really in the mainstream light, because I've been following his work for many years, prior, 2020, even prior to that, to where he is talking about vaccines and environmental issues, and so he was kind of doing his thing for a long time, right? And I remember Alec for a long time was trying to get him to debate the idea of a virus, and it was never entertained. Wouldn't entertain it. I think he even
No.
responded at one point to calls for a debate on that, calling it pointless. Like there is no point in that, it's actually divisive to the movement about, health freedom and whatnot. And
Mm.
so the fact that we can't question the what, the very foundational aspect of it. And it's the same thing with like 9/11. I had a podcast on this fairly recently. A guy named Andrew Johnson came on my show, and he was talking about um, the very first thing he was talking about is like you can't question the what of the story. And he was
Mm.
referring to, you have your narrative that two people hijacked planes, flew them into towers, and the towers fell. And his idea, and I don't know whether he's correct or not, but his idea is that there were direct energy weapons involved in the falling of the towers, right? And what he was saying, it started to make a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, this is a really interesting theory. But he said you can never get to that theory unless you question the what of the narrative, the actual
Mhm.
like foundational aspects. And so I think a lot of these psyops, we've been trained to not question the bigger aspect, the bigger foundational what of the story, the meat of the story. The fact that they introduce a virus, well, the virus itself, even if they unleashed it, it must be true. And we're not psychologically at that point, at least collectively, where we're questioning in that way. It's still a lot of reaction based whys or hows or when or who. And from there, it almost, not that it the questioning the whys and all that stuff, that is important, but you miss a really deep foundational truth. And if we're just reacting regardless of what side of the debate we're on, and we're not questioning the what, maybe we've already lost the debate because we're not talking about the real issue.
And that's how they preserve and protect their narrative, which is their form of social control. Like the narrative is the social control. So if we can't go to the roots and the foundations of it, we are helping them preserve the manipulation and the deception, So I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, I'm always encouraging people to go to the roots of something. You know, like it may not be possible with an example like 9/11 to get to the roots of it, because, we weren't physically there watching, like, most people weren't. But with something like virology, it's absolutely possible to get to the roots of it. And it's actually socially, collectively important that we do so that we can stop these frauds being successful against us and weaponized. Like the idea of contagion, the idea of a virus is a weaponized concept. It has always been a weaponized concept. It's just that in the last 5 years, it's become really obvious that it's a weaponized concept that is absolutely used 100% to our detriment 100% of the time. There is no payoff to believing in viruses. There is no benefit that comes out of that because immediately you give your power away. You give your power away to the external environment. You give your power away to an invisible tiny thing that you can't see or prove exists, but you believe in it. You give your power away to that. Then you give your power away to the medical structure, which is trying to protect you from said invisible tiny thing. Then you give your power away to the political class, the ruling class that is foisting this garbage on you. So at what point do we stop and say, like, let's take our power back? And that's why questioning viruses and virology, the methods, having a civilized conversation about the methods used by virologists is so key because that undercuts the entire thing. That's where we stop giving our power away for no reason whatsoever and start to reclaim it. And then you get another payoff is that we can also get rid of the second tier backup narratives like the lab leak idea, which is held onto by people who still haven't gone to the roots of contagion. It's people who are still hypnotized by contagion that have gone, oh well, the mainstream narrative doesn't quite make sense, so I'm going to go over here where we have the alternative media with this narrative, and something got out of the lab, and like it was weaponized and it was a conspiracy and all this sort of stuff, and it's like, no, like if you look at the data. I mean, and when I say data, I mean from many different streams of data, not just like one. Every field of human endeavor tells us that there was not a pandemic in the way that was advertised. And we also know, thanks to looking at the roots of virology, that it's physiologically impossible for it to be a virological outbreak. So if people really are getting sick, then we need to look at the real reasons why. And, believing what you see in the news is not helping because now you've got the masses programming themselves psychologically to be sick. So we need to stop doing that as well. And if we stop that, then what's left? To me, it looks like not very much. I mean, if you're talking about, COVID-19, it's like you get rid of the nocebo effect, you get rid of all the obvious layers of fraud. And it's like, well, there was a lot of manipulation and a lot of smoke and mirrors. And all I can see is people were breathing awful air in certain places, like, Wuhan and whatever. And then in other places, there were 5G networks being activated, which at least two different independent researchers have correlated the activation of 5G networks to those so-called COVID hotspots, right? So, it doesn't matter how you break it down. If you're willing to do the legwork, it just falls to pieces. And if we go to the roots, that's where we get our power back, and we can stop giving the control away to the bad actors and letting them, I don't care if it's RFK or if it's Hitler or, someone in between. Like the point is that we need to take ownership and reclaim our agency because we are actually the ultimate creative force in our lives. And we've been brainwashed our entire lives to not realize that.
Right, exactly. And it's a self-empowerment that I think is ultimately going to shatter this narrative in a lot of ways because it's easy to believe in something like virology when you are totally disconnected from your own body's natural processes. Like if you're not aware of this food that I'm eating, it might make me sick. I'm not aware of even if you're eating quote unquote healthy, but you're getting vegetables that are sprayed with pesticides and chemicals, right? And factory farmed meat and just, you're getting all of these stressors from your food, right? Oh, okay. That's going to make me sick. You don't realize that's going to make me sick, even though I'm eating healthy, right? Same thing with like Wi-Fi. If you're blasting radiation from electromagnetic frequencies and poisons that are invisible, and that's a tough one because it's invisible, right? A Wi-Fi in her house. I can't see the Wi-Fi. It's here, it's in there, but I can't see it. Same thing with the 5G, the four, whatever the towers that are in every single town and community. It's quite funny because when my mom was looking for a town to move to retire to, her first thing that she would always look for is, do they have a 5G tower? Right. And she would look to see off, and these are like small towns in rural South Dakota. You have like 800, 900 people living in them. But she'd be driving around looking. There's a tower right there. Oh no, it's right in the middle of the neighborhood. Oh, so it's like, oh, I'm gonna be blasted with this radiation, right? And it's like we're so used to seeing those things in towns, and they're everywhere. We don't realize the impact that it does have on our health when we're being blasted with radiation, right? Same thing, you microwave your food, whatever it may be. There is such a disconnect on how the poisons of our external environment, when, maybe it's the chemtrails, whatever it may be, the aluminum we're breathing into the air, the injections we get at the doctor's office, all of these things are going to have a direct impact on our health. But if we don't have any self empowerment as it is to be responsible for who we are, how we feel, the way we show up in the world, well, then of course we're going to believe in an external virus coming in and making us sick because we don't have a level of empowerment to take ownership of that as it is, anyways,
Yeah.
right? So, and maybe the key to getting people to kind of see the other side of virology. I mean, Alex Zek is a perfect example where he is in conscious ownership of his own health, and he is a very, holistic practicing, and he talks about, the natural ways of living and very in touch with nature. All the people I notice who are talking about this, virology being a pseudoscience, tend to live in the same way, and there is a conscious ownership for one's own health. So maybe the key to kind of pulling back the veil is the self-empowerment aspect first, and then once you have a deep enough level of self-responsibility, you can kind of start to put the puzzle pieces together to where, oh, maybe that makes sense, and there is nothing external that is actually impacting my own vibration and my own perception and how it is that symptoms are manifesting in my own body, right? So maybe that's one aspect that will, if we focus on, it'll, the self-empowerment aspect, it'll help kind of shift the narrative that is so deeply ingrained for virology and how people view viruses and medicine and the environment just as a whole.
Yeah, and it's also, I think it's important for people to realize, when you accept the idea of a virus floating around in the environment, you give the government structure, or let's say the structure that runs government, um, ex the exact idea that they need to justify collectivist intervention and totalitarianism.
Mhm.
Because when your health is not coming from inside of you, from the inside out, when it's externally determined, supposedly by viruses, for example, that is something that needs to now be not individually managed by taking ownership, like you're talking about, but it needs to be socially managed. And the medical fraternity now needs to get involved, and the politicians need to create policies because we have to manage the sheep so that they don't get sick from the
Mhm.
mysterious virus. So we keep enabling this garbage and this tyranny by accepting fraudulent beliefs like contagion and viruses and virology. And we need to stop doing that because we're giving them the mechanism and the pathway to tyrannize us and to manipulate us. And I mean, look at the trauma that they created the last 4 years. I mean, how much more of that do we want? Like what they did to children. I mean, you're talking about kids who are like 8 years old, 10 years old, going back to bedwetting, like socially regressing because of the extremely abnormal and stressful circumstances that were forced on them. And that would never have been possible if we were health aware and understood that health is actually an inside job. It starts on the inside. And I would suggest that the most important aspect of it in general is the psychology. Your psyche is the foundation of everything. And that then determines the health of, we talk about the biofield or the auric field, right?
Mhm.
Because that is the most direct manifestation of the mind. In book one, I talk about the aura as being the mind. because it's not in the body, it's not in the brain. So we need to look at it from that point of view. Like the most important thing is how I am in relationship with myself and the world around me. And if my psyche is in good condition, my biofield is in good condition, I am much, much more resilient in general. I'm much more vital and coherent. If I maintain coherence, then really what happens in the environment around me as a general rule is of relatively little importance. I mean, to illustrate that, when I talked to Mari Arce on my show, we talked about, it was all about health. It was all health focused. And, she has people who will come to her, see her in her clinic. And she has a Wi-Fi router in the room that she hides. She keeps it hidden so that anytime, especially if someone who comes into the room with, electro hypersensitivity or who thinks they have electro hypersensitivity, at some point in the conversation, she'll be like, oh yeah, and by the way, here's my router, and did you, and they'll be like, oh, well, I felt nothing, like they didn't know it was there. So the suggestion wasn't there that they should be having a bad experience with it. And so that's one of the ways he helps people to realize that sometimes it's not exactly what we think it is. Like sometimes the external factors are not as big as we think they are. And the most important thing, you look at the work of Eileen McCusick and people like that. It's like start at home, start with your psyche and start with your biofield. And from there, if you have that in order, you're going to be in great shape.
Right. It's almost like not that the external environment doesn't matter per se, but we can really will and train ourselves to be almost become unpenetrable, right? And that's something I've really focused on as well, where it's like I've told myself several times over the last few years, it's like it doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter what they spray in the air. It doesn't matter how much they poison my food or this and this. I myself am going to become unpenetrable in my psyche and in how I'm showing up and how I perceive the world. And, it's if I happen to eat a steak that was factory farmed, like I'm not going to be poisoned like right then and there and experienced crazy symptoms of, whatever, of that because I ate a factory farm steak. But if I'm hyper focused on it and that's all I think about, you're right. There's a very good chance that I'm going to create some sort of illness based on the knowing that there is factory farm cows and I'm eating slaughterhouse meat that's terrible for you and all these different things, right? So it's like we can almost kind of create the way our body reacts to the external environment. And
Mm.
I think that's a really brilliant point that I think often gets lost in the discussion because it is very easy even in the health circles, the holistic circles, to where everything is poison, the world is end, like, and then create and manifest illness based on
Mhm.
those factors, And so if everything is poison around us and I'm constantly taking in poison, how do you think my psyche is going to react to that? What do you think it's going to manifest into? It's going to manifest as symptoms of being poisoned, and then I'm going to have to deal with that, whether it's a chronic illness or whatever it may be. And the only actual solution, let's say you start really avoiding all those environmental toxicities, whatnot, sure, great. That might provide symptoms or not symptoms, alleviation of those symptoms, right? But the second, and we know that the system is only going to continue infringing and releasing further in poisons through the chemtrails and further electromagnetic radiation and throwing up more drones and satellites and towers and whatnot, stronger frequencies, more poison food, all of these things are going to continue to become more infringing. So if you only treat it at the level of the symptoms, as soon as there's more infringement, you have that very same issue come back up when the reality is maybe we need to deal with it at the psychological level first. Certainly, ideally, don't eat a factory farm steak. For every steak, try and get natural, the cattle are raised humanely and it's for local and all, that's a very important thing. But the psychological aspect might be to a greater importance. And I don't think that's talked about very often.
It's not, and I think it's a symptom of the fact that we're still living in basically a fundamentally materialist age. Like everything is focused on a material cause. So we're always looking for, oh, what was the toxic thing that I came into contact with? What was the poison I ate? What was the thing that got on my skin? And it's like, it's actually it's not that you can't be poisoned, you can, but the biggest cause of our symptoms in general, what we call disease or illness, is overwhelmingly the psyche. And the fact that we are distracted from that reality means that we just feed into the cycle. And there are actually people like Dr. John Sarno who formulated a sort of model he called tension myositis syndrome, which is a psychosomatic understanding of the body and its symptoms and the way that the mind essentially programs those symptoms. It's got some links to German new medicine. There's some overlaps there because they're both fundamentally psychosomatic models. But what he found was, and this is what I wanted to talk about because you were getting onto, you triggered this with some of what you were just saying. He found this dynamic at play where people get a symptom as an unconscious way of, and I'm not saying they're creating it intentionally, it's done by the subconscious mind, that they have the symptom to then distract them from something in their life that is maybe causing them an enormous amount of rage or grief. Usually it's rage related because rage is the one thing that we suppress and avoid more than anything else. Like we've even started to come to terms with grief and depression, right? So the big bugaboo is kind of rage and anger. And so that's usually the biggest culprit. So he found that the body, he dealt with hundreds and hundreds of people, one-on-one clients in a clinical sort of setting, and people's patterns kept showing that there was this distraction mechanism playing out where, for example, there was a woman who was bedridden with chronic fatigue and she couldn't get out of bed. So he's having conversations with her, going through the whole sort of biographical situation to see where this might have originated from. And, long story short, she had an issue with her husband. He had done something that she was extremely angry about, but she was unable to express her anger. And as a way of avoiding having to deal with that and face it, she unconsciously generated the chronic fatigue. So now she's focused on her body instead of on her emotions and her mind. So it's this enormously insidious and very clever distraction strategy that we have playing out, and it can take all sorts of forms. And this is the thing; it's so slippery. It can manifest as basically anything you can think of that goes wrong in the body. Could be this distraction strategy unconsciously manifesting. And what he found also was with this woman, once she identified, oh, I'm angry at my husband, and they connected those dots. She got up out of bed, and that was the end of her chronic fatigue, right? So there's lots of stories like this, but another aspect of it is that when you start to maybe get suspicious about the symptom, it can shift locations in the body and start aggravating something completely different and unrelated. So you're like, oh, now my shoulder hurts. What's wrong with my shoulder? Instead of being focused on the emotional content that you're not willing to deal with or grapple with and express and process. So on and on the cycle goes, right? And this connects into German new medicine, where everything that happens, like you can go and look on the website, do a site search for whatever symptom you're dealing with, and you'll find the biological program that's running and the emotional or psychological event that has triggered that symptom, that particular symptom, and the specific aspects of the body that this system or symptom, is connected to, and all this sort of stuff. So when we get our heads around the psychosomatic stuff really, really thoroughly, and we start going to the psychological first instead of the physiological, that's where we start to really exponentially reclaim our agency here.
Right, absolutely. And it's for like myself, for example, I find it much easier to diagnose, like, I'd say, symptoms and illnesses, and like, kind of how I was talking about having a cold after getting the body stress release appointment. It's very easy for me to diagnose that as with the concept you were just talking about, right? Where I know that there's nothing externally coming in at me. So, all right, let's look at the underlying root issues here. But another example is, I've been trying to think of it in this way, but I didn't necessarily know what the root cause is. So I'm gonna have to go and do some research after this. I'm pretty certain I've torn my ACL, right? And I've been doing all the tests for it, and like, where you kind of have to, you press down on the top of your leg when the bottom is at rest, and your foot's supposed to come up and whatnot. And it was showing me that uh, there's no transference from the upper leg to the bottom through the ACL, which is what the ACL is supposed to do, right? So in some way, it is compromised. I don't know if it's torn. I don't trust the medical system enough to actually go and get an MRI or anything like that. I'm just like, all right, the body is expressing a healing symptom. It seems kind of severe, but we'll deal with it. It's not painful per se, but there's a lot of feelings of instability at times, and it's a very compromising um, situation, I suppose. But and I've even been trying to take this approach that you were kind of just talking about. It's like, all right, what is the actual like deeper issue here? How do I actually kind of heal this on the more at the root level? And I don't necessarily have an answer for that yet. I'm sort of more in the early stages of trying to uncover, and I'm going to do things like more PT exercises and whatnot. Because I mean, I could still go to lift and start doing some barbell squats, but I mean that really doesn't help. It puts a lot of pain in that region, and it seems to do more damage than it's worth. So I've had to really start to have a more PT oriented focus for healing. Um, but in terms of looking at, okay, what is the manifestation of this actual on a more emotional level or on a deeper level, right? With what you were just talking about, I don't think we even always um, think of it in that way. It's like, okay, what put that in a compromising position that allowed that symptom and injury to actually manifest itself, right? And so there's levels to this empowerment that I think we can take this, and if we're talking about healing the body naturally. There's a guy I follow on Instagram, and I met him at Alex conference a couple years back. His name's Dr. Brett Jones, and he ruptured his Achilles tendon, right? And he did it all natural healing and treatment, and was talking about these concepts and getting to the root of healing. And he was back doing sprints within 4 or 5 months. Didn't have surgery.
Wow.
He was, so he took on a very aggressive healing process for himself. But, it clearly, and I don't think he was fully healed per se at 4 to 5 months, but he could do a sprint. And,
That's
that
crazy.
that's unheard of for people with
Yeah.
a ruptured Achilles tendon. So I think, taking that approach, what you're just speaking of, it's very easy, even people who are health and freedom oriented, like minded, if you have something that's a traumatic injury, like I have a good friend of mine just the other day, he fractured his heel and the heel bone in his foot, right? And he's not planning on getting surgery or anything like that. But to that level, we're not sitting there talking about, all right, what is the emotional like possible reason that this manifested itself, and it did. Obviously, emotions don't break bones per se, but maybe they make them more they compromise certain areas, right? And if everything is a healing manifestation, a healing symptom, what is it we're actually trying to heal on a deeper level through healing this physical ailment, right? And so
Mhm.
I think there's levels to this that we don't often touch upon in the in these health circles because of that body mind disconnect, how deeply rooted it is. But if we can view everything as an extension of that, then you really start to unpack and heal the deepest aspects of who we are. Because in a way, I think everything that happens in the body is a cry to, hey, see this. And it's not the injury itself, but it's see what's on the deeper surface here, see what's at the deepest level. And then from there, what you explore is kind of what you're meant to find and why it happened to begin with. So, I think there's a lot there on the physical side of it too when it comes to more traumatic types of injuries and ailments that we don't always associate with emotions and trauma or whatever it may be, or like you're saying, anger. Um, we don't always get to that level with
Mm.
health, and I think that's sort of the paradigm shift that we need if we are to uproot things like virology and uproot the whole systematic scam that is taking place.
Yeah, completely. And the body operates in a very kind of like a metaphorical way,
Hmm.
which is something that could be a lot more widely known than it is. And I think that connects with what you were saying about, well, why has a certain physical event happened? What's the psychological aspect underlying it? And you know, for example, if we're in a situation in life that figuratively speaking really stinks, you might find that you have some sinus symptoms, because that's the metaphorical expression of being in a situation that stinks, where your olfactory senses are. You could be in a shitty situation, and then you might eventually, if you get to the point where you heal that situation or you're moving past it, that's when you'll get the healing symptoms manifest, and then you might have some kind of weird like a colon issue or a rectal issue, or something unpleasant starts happening there, and you're like, oh my God, what's wrong with me?
Hmm.
But that is actually the resolution happening in the expression of the symptoms, and it's metaphorical. Like the body's extremely metaphorical. Like we talk about people having the guts to do something, like that's a figure of speech that we overlook. We're so used to it that we overlook how metaphorical that is. Like having the stomach for something, and like how courage is connected to the stomach and the guts, so to speak. So the body understands this language very intimately. So it often expresses things in a metaphorical way, a metaphorical expression of our psychological experience. And that the more we can think like that, the faster we can, get through whatever it is that we're working our way through without interfering with it by going, oh, I need some, I've got to put some antifungal cream on this thing, and like whatever it is, and then you're just suppressing the healing process and interfering with it. So now it's got to come out in a different way, sort of thing. Like, people do that all the time. So it's a very big conversation. It's huge.
Hmm. Right. And everybody's symptoms and everybody's like what's popping up is going to be unique in its own right, right? And that's I think the basis of our allopathic medicine system. Like, I could very easily go schedule an MRI and then go get surgery on my knee and then like have this cookie cutter, like one size fits all approach to here's how you're gonna heal your knee, and right. But then how many other people, people who do that go and tear it again, like later on. It's very common for that to take place. And so it's like, all right, you kind of need to get rid of this one size fits all. Everybody has the same hardware and the same system or in the same circumstances and same stressors. Like the way we approach medicine and the way we approach healing, I mean, I think grounding ourselves in these concepts and these principles is important, but then we do have to do that deeper work to actually understand our own body and understand what's going on in here. And there's nobody outside of ourselves that can actually give you the definitive answer or give you the mental clarity or the knowing or the actual like embodiment of the recognition of the truth of what we're talking about here besides ourselves. Like we have to actually be willing to go inward and actually start doing this deeper work to really heal. And I really think that's what the medical system needs to be built upon and founded on. And I'm not we were talking about moving in the right direction. Maybe everything that we're seeing, with somebody like RFK coming into office and, kind of these bigger discussions that are starting to take place on health and medicine, maybe we're moving towards that in certain ways, but it's kind of almost like how we were talking about we were early to the game for other things. I think us having this conversation now, it's I don't think we're going to see these type of changes on a large systematic scale anytime in the near future by any means. But, as we start to change one thing and we change another thing and, then we start getting into more of that mind body connection, it does feel like only a matter of time to where the system that we've built that is illusionary and a fallacy and built on pseudoscience, as we keep seeing more layers of truth, it's only a matter of time before the deepest of truths, such as this, is actually comes more into focus and enters into some of the larger mainstream conversations, and people start looking at themselves more in this way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the only real threat to that, in my opinion, is of this not happening is sort of the transhumanist approach to where I think that is in a way it's an expression and can run parallel with our current medical system to where we mechanize the body and eventually maybe we create this man machine merger to where we have this illusion we've created the superior machine body, right? And we have this massively weaponized mechanistic approach that infringes upon people. I think that's certainly possible, and in certain ways it's coming, and there will be people who make that choice. But as we go so far that way, I think there's going to be the others who choose to go so far in the other direction, right? It's like that pendulum, or it's like the nature of polarity in certain aspects manifesting. So,
Yeah.
you know, maybe they'll run parallel with one another. I don't necessarily know, but
Mm.
it's tough to predict how that'll actually shape up and manifest.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the transhuman things, so we'll see how
Yeah.
it plays out. Yeah, I mean, I think having conversations like these and entertaining these ideas is it's important to get it in front of more people so that they can start taking charge of their own life without having to wait for the behemoth of the system to just give them permission to have these sorts of thoughts and do these things. Like the last thing that will change will be the establishment. So we can't wait around for it. It's fundamentally built on opposing principles, and it's built on the principle of basically human disempowerment. So it's not really like part of their business model to have empowered people. It's actually based on disempowered people. Like that's the path you take if you don't know what else to do. Like if you don't know why you're sick, if you don't know how to get well, that's what you do. You go into the medical system. And I'm not like saying that in a judgmental way. It's just I went and had an MRI scan myself not long ago, just to see what might have been going on in a certain joint. But I'm not opposed to all forms or levels or aspects of medicine. It's just, the general setup is that when you have no other, or you think you have no other option, or you feel like you're out of ideas or you're hopeless, that's where you end up.
Hmm.
So, it's something that I think we're growing out of it, and who knows? Who knows? It's going to be an interesting, we live in interesting times already. I think we're going to see more interesting times, and politics is going to play a part in it as well, man. I mean, we've mentioned RFK a few times, and this Trump administration, one way or another, is going to kind of determine the next 4 years is really going to be like the determining factor for better or worse of the health of the American psyche. It's going to be if they let the people down and they are not what they advertise themselves as, it's going to be a huge, very traumatic wake up call. Whereas if they are what they advertise themselves as, then it's going to be a more gentle wake up process, more incremental, just gently nudging things in the right direction. And then from there we have a chance to build on that. It's hard for me to picture. I mean, maybe I'm being optimistic, but it's hard for me to picture the people going backwards into like a regressive kind of like a Biden or Hillary Clinton type of regime at this point. I mean, I think even a lot of Democrats seem pretty disillusioned with the way things have played out. And yeah, I mean, politics is unfortunately a big part of the world that we live in. I don't like to dwell on it too much, but in terms of shaping the mass perception of the world and how things work, you can't deny the fact that it plays a role. So, we just got to do what we do and keep putting out, a positive influence and putting good information in front of people who are ready to hear it. We can nudge them 10%, 20% in the right direction, and basically we're doing our job if we do that.
Right. Exactly. And, we'll do it as long as we have the tools and the ability and we're not being censored for doing it. Right. That's all we can really do, brother. Um, so Brendan, this has been fun, man. I'm looking at the time. We've already been on here almost an hour 45 and it's flying by. Where would you send people to go listen to your work? I know you have your podcast. I know you have your Substack. I know you've been working on another book. How's that coming along? Where should we send all the listeners to kind of keep interacting with you?
I guess a good way to keep in touch is through the Substack, in a way, because yeah, I mean from there I can connect them to other things. So mine's called Awakening Minds, by or with Brendan Murphy. So yeah, if they search Awakening Minds on Substack, they'll find me. And yeah, I mean, if they want to check out the Evolve Yourself masterclass, they can go to evolveyourself.live. I'll probably keep doing that for the next. I guess I'll probably be doing that next few months at least. We'll see. But yeah, I think that's more or less it. Substack's a good connecting point for everything else, and they can find your Substack as well while they're at it.
Sweet. I love it, man. I'll put all that in the episode show notes below. How is the book coming along? I'm sure your first book is like a behemoth of a book, and I know you were like, so I know the second one is going to be the same. So, I mean, how's the writing process coming along? You kind of, it's coming together in the way you envision?
It is a behemoth. It is kind of out of control. Yeah, I would say it's basically finished. I have a good mate of mine who lives in the UK, Nick, who is kind of giving me like a peer review process of the book. So I'm feeding him chapters and he's sending them back with notes and things, which is super helpful. And so we've made good progress with that. It's more or less done. I will finish that process with him and get him to go through the whole thing if I can. And then hopefully in the next, I reckon by April. I'm hoping to be in the process of like, okay, starting to, deal with a publisher and get the thing out there, distribute it, and all that kind of jazz. So yeah, it's basically written. It's gonna I think it's going to be a little bit longer than the first one, for better or worse. But I think it's also a more interesting and engaging read. As you know, as much as the feedback I got on book one was very positive, this I think is yeah, this is a kind of another level, and I think people are going to be blown away in a very good way. It's very, like we've been talking about some of the stuff in the world that is disempowering and what have you, as well as the health. We had a very health focused discussion here, but this book that I'm about to publish has nothing to do with really any of that. It's very metaphysical, spiritual, nature of consciousness, what happens when you die, what mapping the different realms of the afterlife and this kind of stuff. And I've had a lot of moments looking at it, going, wow, like I've blown my own mind in the process of putting this material together. So I can't imagine what it'll be like for other people to read. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting it done, and it'll be this year sometime.
Love it, man. I'm excited for you. And I was gonna say we've had those metaphysical discussions in the past too. So it's funny, which path we end up taking on the podcast. And so maybe the next one we do, we'll plan for another one sometime in the near future, and we can kind of unpack some of the ideas you're talking about in the book. And a good way to start planting those seeds for people to really digest what you're putting out there in that. So we can definitely we'll definitely have to plan on that, man. I'm excited for you because I know it's been in the works for a little while. So to see it come to fruition, it's exciting for sure.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. It's been years in the man. Don't get me started. But yeah, we'll have to get you. I'll make sure if I don't get in touch with you about sending you like a review copy, make sure you reach out and I'll shoot you a copy.
Well, I appreciate it, brother, for sure. And I appreciate you coming on again, man. I always enjoy having our discussions. We could go for hours on end because there's just so much to unpack and explore, and we're very much approaching these topics from kind of the same point of intention, at the very least. So I always
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on and the work that you're doing because, it definitely shining a bright light in the space that you are occupying and, doing the good work, my friend. Really awakening the sleeping minds for sure. So it's heartfelt and appreciated, brother, just so you know.
Well, I gratefully receive that, man. I do appreciate it a lot, and thanks for the platform, and I like what you're doing. Keep it up, man, because it's solid. It's intelligent. It's good to have a civilized discussion where we can bounce ideas off each other, and like develop a theme and all this kind of stuff, because it doesn't happen even on a lot of podcasts. You don't get that dynamic. So I appreciate you and what you're doing too, man.
Appreciate it, brother. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in as well. And we will see you guys on the next episode. Special thank you to Brendan for coming on the Fifth Dimension. I look forward to podcast appearance number 5, even though we just wrapped up number 4. But Brendan is always putting in the work. He's always grinding, and he's always bringing massive truth to this show. And I can't thank him enough for the light that he shines on the world and waking people up to the nature of who they are. Because that's what it's all about. Remember who you are. So go subscribe to his Substack, listen to his podcast. There's definitely some mutually aligning guests, that him and I have shared, and guests that'll be coming on in the future that have been on Brandon's podcast before. So him and I are very much aligned in the areas we're exploring. So if you like this show, I'm sure you'll love his work and his Substack, his podcast, all of it, and his new book that will be coming out. I can't wait to read it myself and, to get a copy and have another podcast. Very near future, ladies and gentlemen, so stay tuned. If you're a fan of the show, subscribe whatever platform you are on. You can send us a text or you can go subscribe on mcdermott.substack.com. Once again, if you're interested in diving deep into tarot, the 12-week Hero's Journey course may be for you. Full description and link is in my episode show notes below. Use the code 5D on checkout. You'll get 20% off. That's a really, really good deal. I can't emphasize that enough. And special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. It's going to wrap up this episode, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you all next time. So long.